Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to another edition of What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse, and today is Thursday, quick, Kurt, what's the date today? August what?
5th.
August 5th.
All day.
All day. Today is August 5th, 2021. I'm here with Kurt, and we welcome you. As you know, or may remember, this is a call-in program. Later on, you will see on the screen towards the bottom, there we go, the Zoom numbers to call if you would like to join our discussion. We also have a guest today. I don't know his name. I'm going to say his name is Teddy, although he looks like Teddy's grandpa. He's kind of old. And he has a New Year's Eve hat. And that is because we are going to go back in time to Monday, December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1962, through two articles that appeared in the Vermont, in the Burlington Free Press from that day. The Burlington Free Press, December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1962. Two articles that caught my attention that I thought would be interesting and entertaining to go over. But I wanted to read one last thing from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the former Cavendish, Vermont resident for 18 years that spent 18 of his 20 years in exile in Vermont, and before going back to Russia after the Soviet Union had broken up in 1994 to spend the last 10 years of his life. And it's a paragraph from his book, The Gulag Archipelago, 1918 to 1956. The gulags actually started during the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918, as a way of removing people that might be a problem for the new regime. This was Lenin, of course, Vladimir Lenin, and putting them to work in work camps. And this system lasted throughout the reign of Joseph Stalin, into the reign of, or regime perhaps is a better word, of Nikita Khrushchev, and who came to power in 1953, and then gradually phased out the work camp system to a large degree in 1956. And I just thought what he said was interesting. This obviously was a police state, the Soviet Union, and he wrote about something that came up time and time again with other prisoners in the various work camps where he lived during his 5 years of sentence. If you remember, he was sentenced to not 5, but 8 years of labor for having written letters to a friend while serving in the Soviet Red Army in 1943, and those letters criticized the management of the Red Army, and of course the management is Joseph Stalin, a one-man or one-person rule. And he says, we often mulled over in the camps, thinking time and time again, what would things have been like if every security operative, every NKVD operative or agent, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive or had to say goodbye to his family? Or if during periods of mass arrests, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire population, that I didn't know, when they arrested a quarter of the entire population, people had not simply sat in their lairs or their homes, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood instead that they had nothing left to lose, and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. The organs or the authorities would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. If we didn't love freedom enough, and even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened to us afterwards. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Very strong, condemning statement of his fellow countrymen. But it's really, it strikes very deeply into the psyche of human beings and our survival nature and how we choose to survive in a very dangerous situation. Kurt, do you have any reaction to that part or that paragraph taken from his book, The Gulag Archipelago? Any thoughts?
At this point, no, actually.
I know it's pretty heavy. It's a heavy statement.
It is.
Very strong. And I think it's a statement born of bitterness that he perhaps had not fought his arrest more, that if there was a movement of resistance, that the terror might have stopped. But most people, I think, instinct for survival can go either one way or the other. You cover up for cover, or you hide hoping for the best, or you come out of the corner fighting. He obviously favored coming out of the corner and fighting, even if it meant the odds, the near certain death. It would have been preferable to die at once than to, I guess the Chinese saying, die the death of 1,000 cuts, while being slowly worked to death in a labor camp for punishment of a couple of lines in a letter that happened to be intercepted through the censorship of the Red Army postal system. So anyway, it's very striking, and that's why I wanted to bring this up. Now, to something a little bit more festive. New Year's Eve, 1962. Two articles that I thought were interesting. One was on a group of people. They are called les Montagnards, or the mountain people. And these people were originally settled as the first people along the coast of Vietnam. They were what we would call native Vietnamese. And around the 9th century, through invasions from Korea, China, perhaps Japan, they were pushed inland towards the highlands, which fortunately were very fertile, and they became farmers and subsided off of farming. They had interaction with the French while Vietnam was a colonial outpost for the French Empire about 200 years ago. And many of the Montagnards were converted to Christianity, Catholicism, and were pretty much left alone. When Hanoi, the rest of North Vietnam, became communist, I'm going to say in the late 40s, after Mao had taken over China, there was an effort to kind of win the Montagnards, and there were 700,000 to 900,000 of them living in the High Plains area, so quite a few people. A large population group in Vietnam. There was an effort by the North Vietnamese to win them over to their system. Big conflict right away. The communists do not have a belief in a god or a spiritual presence of a god, and saw that as an impediment to their socio-economic model that they wanted to broaden throughout all of Vietnam, North and South. And the Montagnards, or the mountain people, being Christian, resisted this. And so enter the United States in the early 60s, Special Forces. What they did, and this was successful at first, they set up, or they helped the Montagnards set up armed or defendable villages with two or three security zones around them, and the Montagnards were armed with weapons, and they located them in areas where they could still farm, and it was easier to defend their settlements. And the U.S. Army Special Forces helped set up hundreds of these hamlets or villages in the central highlands of Vietnam. And it seemed to be a successful program because the Montagnards got along better with the Americans than the actual Vietnamese. They trusted Americans, the faces they saw, the help that they brought, more than the Vietnamese government in Saigon. And so that worked to our advantage. But unfortunately, as we know, 10 years later, Saigon would fall, and the Montagnards would be forced by the incoming Viet Cong to relocate to less desirable farmland because the Viet Cong, or the North Vietnamese, had decided to grow coffee where the Montagnards had lived. And so it was kind of like similar to Native Americans or Indians here in this country being moved from their tribal homelands to reservations generally in land that was less than desirable as far as weather and agricultural usages potential. So very hard, much harder to eke out a living in these new areas where they were forcibly resettled by the Vietnamese in the 70s. Interestingly enough, Kurt, and I found this kind of heartwarming, there was such a bond between the Special Forces, Army Special Forces, and the Montagnard people that many Montagnards, after Saigon fell in early 75, they were sponsored to come over and resettle in the United States. And so that in the area of Fort Bragg, Georgia, there's a large community of Montagnards that have settled there because that's where the Special Ops veterans live. Many of them chose to stay in the area where they trained, in the area of Fort Bragg, around the town of Asheboro in North Carolina. And today there is an active community, there has been for decades, of Montagnard people, native Vietnamese, that have moved and have flourished and have successfully transplanted themselves and their culture, their language, with the help of U.S. Army Special Forces. So I think that that is an instance of good that we have done over in another country that otherwise we fumbled the ball on in many plays. So it's a short article. There's a picture that is hard to see, but the camps or the villages were set up in a teardrop formation, and you see longhouses that are in rows of 5 or 6, longhouses like we've had with some of the tribes here in our country. And these longhouses is where people lived, and they farmed the area outside the perimeter. The perimeter had 2 or 3 barriers, trenches, armed sentries, etc. Very much like the Middle Ages when we had a castle that a prince or a lord would manage or run, and then the peasants or the serfs would till the land around the castle. When there was a threat from the outside, everybody would come behind the castle walls for protection. Similar to these hamlets, and there were hundreds of these, in the Central Highlands running south to north through the backbone of Vietnam. So, 63 Outlook Brighter. Remember, we're reading, it's Monday, December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1962. Mountain tribesmen called Montagnards, from the French mountain people, have helped anti-communist forces gain a precarious foothold in South Vietnam's Central Highlands for the first time since French colonial days. Prospects for 1963 look fairly bright. This is the Associated Press. All the articles in this paper are Associated Press, unless they're local. Scores of new protected hamlets have been constructed deep in territory formerly controlled by the communist Viet Cong. Tribesmen inhabiting the region have been armed with Tommy guns and other weapons, and tribal striking forces are working effectively against the Viet Cong. The highlands, blanketed by dense jungle, are sparsely populated but make up about 2/3 of the land of South Vietnam. The area has been of special importance to the Viet Cong as a corridor from communist North Vietnam to the Rice Bowl of the South, where most of the fighting takes place, the Mekong Delta. Americans have played a key role in chipping away communist influence in the highlands. U.S. Army Special Forces, American aid officials, and the Central Intelligence Agency have all been active. The Americans developed new communities this year for relocating tribes and training them to fight and also paying them. All right. So more incentive. Viet Cong propaganda denouncing anti-communist activities among the Montagnards has stepped up sharply. Communist guerrillas, who once went to great lengths to make friends with the Montagnards, now attack villagers in force, loot undefended communities, and draft tribesmen for hard labor. In the Darlak Plateau, a particularly wild area, there are stories about the Viet Cong that have buried resisting Montagnards alive. Change in Viet Cong tactics is viewed widely as an indication that the communists are losing and forced to use terror in place of persuasion. But there's a long way to go. Government forces must move tribal communities one by one for resettlement into secure areas. The Viet Cong, which often forces villagers to live out of reach of the government forces, and there's a tear in the paper. All right, another problem that has arisen is when Americans who have spearheaded much of the work turn over practical details to Vietnamese authorities. See, this was the rub. The Vietnamese authorities did not get along with the Montagnards, and hence a lot of the good that was done by our involvement was erased by this centuries-long animosity and distrust between the two sides. Montagnards are Vietnamese citizens, but of different racial and linguistic stock from the lowlanders. Many Montagnards regard the lowlanders as exploiters, and many lowlanders regard the Montagnards as savages. That sounds familiar. Prejudices persist. The Saigon government has been driving hard for the past year to overcome the breach, but traditional prejudices persist. In many instances, Montagnards have told Americans they would work with Americans, but not with Vietnamese. Ultimately, the struggle for the highlands will be won or lost depending on whether the Saigon government itself, as distinct from mixed U.S. and Vietnamese forces, is able to extend its control. The 700,000 Montagnards are regarded as a key to control of the Republic. A simple people, they are at home in jungle warfare. Well, so are the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese. Unfortunately, we know what happened 10 years later and bit by bit over that passing time in between. So, Kurt, any comments on the Montagnards?
Well, as you're saying that, what comes to my mind, I was quite surprised about the military actually aiding these people to immigrate to the United States and give them shelter. And I'm wondering what's seeing the parallel today of the troops leaving Afghanistan, and what's made the news is the government has not been so active at making sure that every interpreter is going to be safely brought to the United States, because the Taliban have already cited looking for all these interpreters, and as soon as we're out, we'll kill them and their families, and those people are running out of time. And from what I understand, I mean, they've just been dragging their feet on trying to process paperwork and everything else. I mean, they need to load up and go. There's not much time left.
Exactly.
So,
I read an article in a paper about 2 weeks ago in which they say the Taliban is standing before Kabul, and that many of the troops that are going to defend Kabul are females. And why are females so interested in defending Kabul? Because the Taliban will bring back a system, a social caste system, whereby the women have very few personal rights. And those that have exercised their personal rights will be persecuted. And as you said, in many cases, those people that aided the Americans will be massacred. There is no integration. You're either with the Taliban or you're not. And I think once the U.S. pulls out and Germany has pulled out, this paper was the paper out of Frankfurt, there's going to be a bloodbath, but it's heartening and sad at the same time to see people, again, many women in uniform, armed and ready to make a last stand. And it angers me in that I think, what have we been doing over there? I don't know how many years the U.S. has been involved, but 20. How many lives how many American lives have we lost? How much have we lost in resources? Was this an unwinnable situation, or were there a series of ball fumbles like we had in Vietnam?
just ask the Russians. Look what they did. They spent decades there as well, and they ended up running away.
Exactly. And I think the situation is we go into a country we don't understand. Russians obviously thought this was a security issue, so they would muscle their way in and secure a border that they saw was important to maintain as a secure ally of Russia. Our reason for being over there is less clear. We're not a neighbor of Afghanistan. But again, this is why I think fundamentally geography and the study of other cultures, other religions, definitely other languages is so important, because the people that are not trained in this go into our military, they go into our foreign service, and they're not ready to deal with a country as alien in values and in topography and language as, let's say, Afghanistan or Vietnam. And again, this isn't even being discussed. It's not in mainstream news. There's no talk of Afghanistan. It's distressing that the media focuses on certain things and then everything else, especially beyond our borders, is silent. No discussion. We don't know what's going on in North Korea. We get little filtered snippets of what's going on in China, as long as it's corona-related or weather-related. Nothing from Afghanistan, yet we've lost lives over there. And people's family have made a big sacrifice in their young daughter or son being killed over there. And so I really... we're going through interesting times. I hope we come out of the other side of this turmoil we're currently in with a better press. Because if we don't have a better press or a more informed group of people, it's very easy to hoodwink them and to lead them to look in one direction through distraction, while a part of the world is going up in flames, a part of the world where we invested lives and material. But anyway, that's my take on it. All right, anything to add, Kurt, on that?
No.
Okay,
no, good
fair
point.
enough. Because it's New Year's Eve, I thought this was clever and it was interesting. The Burlington Free Press published an ad whereby they would pay for people's funerals. Would you like to hear about it? It's an announcement that the paper would pay for people's funerals under certain conditions. Would you like to hear what those conditions are?
I can't wait.
All right, here it is. It's right here in part 2 of the paper in the corner. It says, you can be buried free if you register before your New Year's Eve traffic death. To impress Vermonters with the need to refrain from driving if they've been drinking on this New Year's Eve, the Burlington Free Press makes this service available. Are you listening? Okay.
Yes, I am.
All right, number 1. There's only 2. If you feel you may be driving under the influence of liquor between 10 p.m. December 31st, 1962, and 6 a.m. January 1st, 1963, call the Free Press, Union 3 3441, between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Monday, and register your name and address. Ask for New Year's Eve registry. Names will not be published unless accidents occur. Number 2. If you are registered and killed in an automobile accident between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., as above, your funeral expenses will be paid by the Burlington Free Press. And that's their offer on New Year's Eve. So let's hold an imaginary...
I'd love to know if anybody took them up on it.
I'm waiting to get the January 1st edition. Tuesday,
There you go.
January 1st, the Burlington Free Press, but I may have to go to maybe 30 or 40 yard sales before I find it. This paper, Kurt, came out of a house that there was an estate sale, and I was invited to go through some paperwork. And this came up, and I thought I need to share this with the audience. All right, so the other story. Okay, this also has resonance today. It says, and this is from Jack Leffler, AP Business News writer. Some stores cry foul over newest card parties. Editor's note: card parties are increasing throughout the United States. These are different, however. They are aimed at keeping goods from communist bloc nations off the shelves of American stores. President Kennedy says the organized campaigns are not the way to fight communism, and some merchants are crying foul. The following article, based on a nationwide survey, details the situation. New York, AP. A group of men and women enter a department store and slyly slip printed cards among the merchandise. The message: always buy your communist imports at the name of the store. The tactic has been carried out in hundreds of American department, variety, and food stores this year. Participants call it a card party. Their aim is to start to boycott stores offering merchandise imported from countries behind the Iron Curtain. Now, for people younger than, what would you say, Kurt, 40? The Iron Curtain was the line drawn between the East and West, the Soviet Union and its satellite countries, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, etc., and Western Europe, the rest of in Western Europe. The movement has mushroomed and achieved some success despite the U.S. government policy of encouraging peaceful trade with Soviet bloc countries. Some merchants have resisted the pressures and ignored demands to withdraw the merchandise. A spokesman for the National Council of Importers commented that as long as the administration approves of these imports, it isn't fair to boycott. President Kennedy, asked about the boycotts at his December 12th news conference, said, "I think that it harasses merchants, and I don't think it really carries on much of an effective fight against communism." A Miami, Florida chiropractor, it's interesting that he's a chiropractor, Dr. Jerome Harold, is generally considered the originator of the boycott idea early this year. He calls his organization the Committee to Warn of the Arrival of Communist Merchandise on the Local Business Scene. Well, that pretty much says it all, huh, Kurt? Harold said Saturday, "Locally and nationally, our program is moving nicely. I would say it's snowballing." Interesting from a chiropractor in Miami. I would say it's snowballing. We are well organized, chapters in all states except Hawaii and Alaska, and last week we established one in Washington, D.C. Reports from around the country indicate that the ultra-conservative John Birch Society is taking an active part in the movement. Harold says his organization isn't affiliated with the John Birch Society, but welcomes its support. The boycotts are aimed at stopping sales of such merchandise as, drumroll, canned hams from Poland, wood products from Yugoslavia, bicycles from Czechoslovakia, and I'm thinking mopeds, right, Kurt? Furs and fish from Russia, caviar, right? Camera film from Bulgaria, that threw me, I didn't know about that. Lobster from Cuba, glassware from Hungary, coat racks from Romania, interesting, Romania exported coat racks, and cameras from East Germany. Not surprised there. Imports valued at $81.1 million last year from communist countries accounted for less than 1% of the $14.7 billion U.S. total imports. U.S. exports to the Soviet bloc amounted to $133.4 million. So essentially, It's a 2-1 relationship. We take in 1 from their side, but they take in 2 from our side, very roughly speaking. A committee starts its offensive against the store handling Soviet bloc merchandise by personally complaining to the manager and follows up by writing to the store owner. If this fails, it stages a card party. Very good. Under pressure of boycott activities, such big chains as, and this will show how old you are, Kurt, Sears, Roebuck and Company, F.W. Woolworth, S.S. Kresge,
Wow.
and Walgreen, and many other retailers have stopped stocking communist goods. The committees are getting some official support. In Birmingham, Alabama, a city ordinance was passed requiring a $5,000 license fee from a store selling communist goods. Similar municipal legislation set up $1,000 license fees in Montgomery and Phoenix City, Alabama. Phoenix City, Alabama, that's interesting. Columbus, Georgia, and Butte, Montana. Butte, Montana, how about that? However, all has not been smooth sailing for the card party participants. 8 of them were arrested in a Yonkers, New York department store and charged with disorderly conduct. The state's attorney general at Decatur, Illinois, said he would recommend that anyone caught distributing cards be prosecuted for trespassing. While some merchants capitulated, others refused to back down. In a nutshell, I told them to go to hell, said Joseph Mendel, operator of the 14-store Yankee discount chain in Michigan. I object to any group of crackpots who walk up to a legitimate businessman and tell him what merchandise to carry and what not to carry. And that's it. I just thought it was interesting because we, over the last year and a half, have heard talk of boycotting certain companies, or definitely I know there's been resistance to further importation of products made in China and a few other countries. But that sentiment is not exactly new, and people have been considering boycotting these products that have come as the result of trade agreements, and that whose purpose originally is to bring countries closer together. Trade with China certainly has brought the U.S. and China closer together, yet China still has a very authoritarian government that really has not softened in its take on control of how its people worship, or what they say, write, or what information they have access to. But anyway, it was interesting to read a little bit of a local give and take as to both sides of whether or not people have the right to ask somebody to take something down, or just simply don't go into the store, or simply don't buy the product. What do you think, Kurt? Well,
you may have heard a number of years ago that there was an argument because of Walmart. I think they were the largest importer of Chinese goods, and through some of the resistance and complaints, they have tried to scale down their purchase of even foreign material and try to source more domestic-made material. But unfortunately, so many of those industries now have literally left the country that,
such as electronics. Such as electronics.
Yeah, I mean, particularly electronics, but even like textiles and things. I mean, there's not many things that we manufacture in the United States anymore. We've done so much outsourcing on it, and China's been so good at taking those types of industries in and running with them. And I mean, I'm a manufacturer, and it's almost impossible for over 60-70% of what I use to find it even manufactured in this country anymore. We're compelled to buy it from them. And, you know, growing up in the 50s and 60s, when it was better dead than red, I mean, somehow we lost that focus. And those people there that tried to hold back, you know, Soviet or communist source materials, somehow we lost that focus in the late 70s and the 80s. People were just thrilled to get their $5 shirts and so forth, and it all ended. So I don't know. I just hope the car industry doesn't get eaten alive like everything else has.
Right. No, those are good points. I think what happened was the money that people could make, especially brokers or people in the middle that arranged between the Chinese manufacturer and the American buyer. There was a lot of money made in transactions, and also the conditions of trade agreements, I'm sure, were influenced by bribes, I'll say it, bribes, and bought access to policymakers and lawmakers who were directly involved in passing, creating, amending, and finally passing in these trade agreements with various countries, not just China, but Canada, Central and South America, etc. So, but the end result has been cheap labor overseas without union protection, and no lack of environmental protection, lack of safety and protection in the workplace. So it's as I think Reagan said when he was president, it's not a level playing field, and unfortunately our manufacturing has taken a hit, perhaps with the awareness of shortfalls in our trade agreements. That discussion will promote further inspection of how we can negotiate better trade deals without giving away all our manufacturing. So, any other points before we sign off, Kurt? Because we're running over a little bit.
Oh, okay. No, I can totally agree with you in the terms of the inequities of the trade agreements, and it is unfortunate that somehow we don't hold a trade balance to be in place. I mean, if they imported from us what we import from them, that's, would be a level playing field. But I mean, it's been so much inequity for so long. I mean, that's how you're looking at these trillions in deficits, financial deficits. And I don't know how we'll weed our way out of it. But I can just tell you, being a manufacturer, it's hard to turn manufacturing around now, nor do you even want to find Americans that want to be in manufacturing.
That's true.
That's what made this country, that and agriculture.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping there's a renewal of interest in the trades and people working with their hands, and also people inventing and manufacturing, because that's what brought us our current level of comfort in this country, and it helped raise everybody's boat, so to speak, by giving them an opportunity to have work, have meaningful work, and raise a family with the income that they need. So, very good, Kurt. I'm going to say goodbye, and goodbye to the audience for this week. We'll be back next week, Thursday. Thursday at 5:45. And I'm not sure what we will be talking about, but hopefully it'll be interesting and entertaining. So, Kurt, we will talk again soon.
Very fine.
All right? All right. Everyone, have a good weekend coming up. And take care. God bless. And we'll see you again soon. Cheers.